On the other hand, I have a question about the other side. What is the most shocking discovery or story, or one of them that you have encountered that you would like to share that gives an understanding of what you have discovered or what we're up against? Some story of, oh my God, they're really doing this. And then perhaps the next question will be a story that's on the more positive side. Why don't you start first, Carey, because you...
I can't, there's so many. I mean, there are so many.
Just pick one. It doesn't have to be the most, just one that you'd like to share.
So writing the book for me was really eye-opening because as a reporter, you know, you write, I mean, sometimes at Reuters I'd write 5 stories a day, literally 5 stories a day. So, you know, it's bits and pieces and you have this and this, but when I took time to sit down and to write this book and to put all of these things together and all of these stories together, I mean, I would just stop and I'd go, oh my God, like this is bad, you know, this is, I think for me, it's the deceptiveness that has gone on. And I was asked to speak at the European Parliament to testify when they were considering the re-registration of glyphosate in late 2017. And they had 6 scientists, international scientists, and then they had me, which was an incredibly surreal. I kept saying, are you sure you know who I am? Like, you know, why am I here? But they had me come and testify, and the title of my presentation was Decades of Deceit. And you know, 30 seconds before it was my turn to address Parliament, I panicked, and I said, oh my gosh, like, I'm getting ready to accuse one of the largest companies in the world of decades of deceptive tactics, like right here in front of everybody, you know, on TV. Can I actually do that? And then I realized, yeah, because that's the truth, and we have the evidence of that. We have decades, at least 4 decades of deceptive tactics by Monsanto and some of their allies in the chemical industry, but Monsanto stands apart as sort of the biggest and the baddest and the, you know, I mean, the things that they have been doing. And I've covered corporate America for 30 years, and I covered the banking industry for a long time, and there's a lot of, you know, dirty tricks that go on. But the things that this company has done deceptively, strategically, they lay out plans. I know I've got to come up with one really good example. What one would it be? I mean, the ghostwriting, the scope of the ghostwriting that has gone on. You've heard a lot of that about ghostwriting scientific studies, and that's pretty outrageous as it is. You know, there's one in particular set of independent papers on the carcinogenicity of glyphosate, an independent panel. This was published in Critical Reviews in Toxicology. This refuted the International Agency for Research on Cancer. They were wrong. These scientists looked at all the evidence. Those scientists were wrong. Glyphosate doesn't cause cancer. It's totally safe. Independent panel. There's a declaration at the end of this, these papers. It says neither any Monsanto employee nor attorney nor, you know, reviewed or edited or had anything essentially to do with these papers. It says it right there. Then you look at these internal emails from Monsanto and you see them talking about writing these papers. You know, we're going to write this, I did this, I wrote this draft chapter, I'm moving this around, I'm doing this. By the way, who are we going to say is the author? You know, what independent scientist are we going to say is the author of this? I mean, that sort of thing. And you see it over and over and over. You see it going back decades. You see them talking about, we need this to happen, but we don't want anybody to know Monsanto's behind it. We need to create an international scientific outreach team, a team of scientists around the world who will get up and shout, glyphosate is non-toxic, you know, who will carry the water for us with policymakers and lawmakers and others. And we need no one to know that we're associated with them. You know, it's that sort of thing over and over again. You see them sending payments to universities, to professors at universities, and discussing how the money can be routed so that it doesn't have to be publicly disclosed. And at the same time, they're having these professors deliver presentations, and they're sending them slideshows, and they're sending them, you know, ideas for how they can make videos on the university dime, but they'll be, you know, Monsanto's got the idea and here's what it's supposed to look like. I mean, one of the best emails. I mean, just as a short little story, as a university professor, University of Illinois professor, and he's getting a lot of money coming from Monsanto, and they're sending him, I believe it was to India. Maybe it was India, maybe not. I can't remember now.
China. He was Bruce
Was
Chassie?
it China? And
Are you talking about Chassie?
I can't even remember. Yeah, and he's writing. I've forgotten, like, where am I going? Who am I talking to? What am I saying? Like, he's writing this to Monsanto, you know. But he went as an independent, you know. It's just, it goes on and on and on. So I didn't answer. I didn't pick a good anecdote, but
I think
the
you did
whole
great.
thing,
I
the
think
whole
you
thing
did
is
great.
just jaw dropping.
I think you did great. You gave us a real good dose. A real good dose. Thank you. Vandana, would you like to take it from there?
I think added to the issue of deception is this idea that if we just become so big, that our false claims will be the truth of the future. And whether, you know, Monsanto was never in the seed business. It's the biggest seed controller. And because they were getting a dirty name, partly because of books like yours.
Thank you.
They thought Bayer taking on the ownership would give them a big range. But Bayer just had to lay off, I think, 2,000 people. Because the day of
August 10th.
of the Johnson decision,
Verdict. August 10th.
they lost 35%. They thought they'd get bigger, and just like banks were supposed to be too big to fail in 2008,
Yeah.
the idea of I call these people the poison cartel, you know, just because how can you keep taking so many names when they're really just one cartel? You know, it's simpler. I'm trying to look at my little diagram of the poison cartel. Yeah, there they are. And on top, you know, IG Farben, but on the right-hand bottom is, guess what? Heroin. Bayer's first invention, not aspirin, heroin. Called heroin because it made the person who took it feel like a hero. So they're not just a poison cartel, they're a drug cartel. And the levels of concentration that they see as their defense mechanism against what people want as a food and agriculture system. In writing this new book called Oneness versus 1%, which should be available in this country, it's just been published in India, Monsanto has bought up the world's biggest climate data corporation.
Right.
It's bought up the world's biggest soil data corporation. Jointly, they want to control the agricultural insurance sector, which they expect to hit $3 trillion together, their agriculture business. They're getting big. If you notice now, they've stopped talking anything else but digital agriculture. Big data. And I have more to say on that, but I think this obscene levels of concentration, in India, our competition commission, our antitrust body, had rejected the merger of Bayer and Monsanto. One day before the general body meeting in Bonn. Suddenly, the Indian Competition Commission approved it. And the European Competition Commission, which is so strict on so many antitrust issues, cleared this very, very fast. The other thing we are finding, and part of the poison cartel, is when Bayer was buying Monsanto, I really wanted to know, you know, who's the controlling interest? Turns out it's billionaire money. The same people who hijack your elections. With dark money, hijack your food. With dark money. And if you look at all of these corporations, all of them But the biggest shareholders now are the big investment funds, not individual shareholders. And they're deciding what is profitable and what will bring them the fastest, quickest, highest return on investment. Sadly, criminality is very profitable business. And goodness is good living, but might not generate the trillions they're seeking. And so it is a very direct clash between the money machine, which owns the poison cartel, and our daily food, and our daily bread, and our daily freedom.
What's the question?
So tell us a story. You're a story writer, storyteller, and tell us about a shocking moment, something that really laid it out for you that conveys some deeper understanding to all of us about what you've encountered in your research.
Well, I think there were there were many. I think I, agree with Carey that there were many moments where, I felt shocked. I guess I would talk about just two moments in particular that were particularly astounding to me. I mean, I had a lot of weird things happen to me when I was working on this book, but one, I was interviewing Bruce Chastity, actually, who I was interviewing him back in 2013, and at that time he did not identify himself as a paid consultant for Monsanto, and the money trail hadn't been figured out yet. And he's a professor at the University of Illinois, and he was supposedly an independent scientist. But somebody had told me, perhaps it was you, I don't know, somebody had told me that there was some connection with him to Monsanto, and I don't remember exactly, but or that maybe he could shed some light on sort of their side of things. So I ended up on the phone with him, and it was kind of a shocking conversation because he was so amped up and so angry the entire conversation. But it became clear as I interviewed him, and then I hung up and I actually called him back, and we had he yelled at me. But what became clear was that actually he was economically tied to Monsanto. But that wasn't actually the most shocking thing, because I was expecting kind of to find that. What was shocking to me was that he told me about how our regulatory agencies, the USDA and the EPA and the FDA, how tied their hands were, and how the companies were in fact providing all of the data and telling the EPA and the USDA and the FDA when to jump, basically. And I was shocked by that because I still, I guess, naively assumed that our regulatory agencies were at least pushing the papers. And he laughed at me and he said, and this is the part that will always be seared in my mind, is he said they would have to back up 2 tractor-trailer trucks of documents for each study, right? For looking at each, not even just each chemical, but like looking at the chemical from this angle, say. And the EPA, the USDA, the FDA, nobody has the staff to go through those papers, and they're not going to. So it's up to the company to then tell them, here's what we found, here's what you can say, and here's what's wrong or good, or what the upshot is of these studies. And so it was completely on their terms. We had nobody looking over those papers, nobody going through them, nobody calling them out. And I guess that was really shocking to me. That hadn't occurred to me before. Several years later, in 2015, my book was going to come out in a year, and it was the end of 2015, and we had just begun what ended up being 6 months of fact-checking and legal checking for the book, and it took forever. And I got a phone call from a reporter at the Times named Eric Lipton. Many of you may know him. He's an amazing reporter. And he said, you're in those emails. And I had at that time a 1-year-old child, and I had a book coming out, and I had no idea what emails he was even talking about. And it turned out that I was in these emails between a guy named Kevin Folta, who's a researcher in Florida, and Bruce Jassy, the same Bruce Jassy I'd interviewed a couple of years ago. And when my piece, The Bad Seed, had come out in Elle magazine, they had been emailing each other, and with a guy named Eric Sachs at Monsanto, who had started the email chain about how to shut me down. How could they silence me? And as a mother of 2 children and a person with a book coming out and being a writer who had sort of stumbled into this agricultural story, I remember being really shocked by that and scared. And I felt like, who are these people actually? And how would that happen? It was a very startling moment for me. So I guess those are the two of the many moments. But another moment was when I was driving across the Great Plains and I had someone intimate that perhaps I would get kidnapped if I continued on the quest I was on. Those were all shocking to me. I hadn't ever encouraged I hadn't ever encountered anything like that before. So.
I just remember that in 1998, when Monsanto brought its GMO BT cotton into India illegally because we had laws to regulate the approvals, imports, field trials, as well as commercialization. They were putting huge ads in the newspapers that next year Indian farmers would have the bollguard cotton, it's called, because it's supposed to protect the cotton from the bollworm pest. It doesn't, it fails in that. But I saw these ads, I'd been looking at this issue since the 80s, so I immediately rang up my Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Environment, said, did they get approval? Because Ministry of Environment needed to give approval for the releases long before the UN biosafety laws were put in place, and I was on the expert group to draft that. We had laws in India in 1989 to regulate GMOs. So I rang up ministry and said, did you get an application from Monsanto? They said, we don't know Monsanto, we don't know BT cotton, no application. I rang up Ministry of Agriculture because any seed is supposed to go through 2 years of trial, even non-GMO seed, 2 years of trial for adaptation to 22 agroecological zones that India has. And it's only when they're fit for that area they're approved for release. They said, we've never heard of this company. No one came to us. So I put the material together and tracked where their trials were and filed a case. Well, before I went to the court, they came to know I was filing the case. And I think it was 2 or 3 days before, I'm in the office and I'm getting call after call after call. And initially I would have my secretary pass it on. It's a call from Korea. It would be C.S. Prakash pretending to be in Korea. These were all the lobbyists who have been, now through the Monsanto papers, they're all out there. Call from Paris, another lobbyist, all threatening me, saying, if you file, serious consequences. And then I crossed over, my home is just a little walk away from the office. And those were days of landlines, no smartphones, no nothing. And at home, there were only 2 people who had my number. My sister and my son, who was studying in this country at that time. So when I entered, the phone rang, and I thought maybe my son's calling. So I ran and picked it up. And I get a call, now you can't pretend you're not home. We've just watched you enter, and we are warning you, don't file this case. So I rang up my close friend, and I rang up some of my close colleagues, and asked them to come over and pick up the writ and make copies. And I said, 5 of you must be ready to submit it in the court on my behalf if I don't make it. but they didn't do anything after those threats, and we submitted. And those cases prevented the commercialization till 2002, by which time they learned how to bribe the Indian regulatory system like they bribed the system here. And now the sad thing is, every day we have to deal with not just Monsanto, but with the government standing by their side. And it's the way you have to deal with it, because more often than not, EPA and USDA are talking on their behalf rather than on behalf of the citizens of this country, whose environmental care and public health they should be looking after.
Some years ago, I was in Europe and I was introduced to a former Monsanto scientist who told me that 3 of his colleagues at Monsanto, who had studied the milk from cows treated with Monsanto's genetically engineered bovine growth hormone, they found in the milk such high levels of a cancer-promoting hormone, IGF-1, that the 3 Monsanto scientists decided to not drink milk again unless it was organic. One bought his own cow. He said that he also learned from other Monsanto scientists while at the company that they found that a genetically engineered corn damaged rats. But instead of withdrawing the corn, they rewrote the study to hide the effects. And his big concern was this: Monsanto's highest level of GMO corn that they use in their studies is 33%. But this man knew that in southern Africa, corn is a staple. The rats were fed the corn for 90 days. The people in South Africa eat it 3 times a day for their whole lives. So he was deeply concerned about the effects. I was interviewing a Midwestern veterinarian who had a client in South Africa. And he said that the client had terrible health problems with his pigs and cows. Pigs seemed like they were sometimes having Alzheimer's or dementia, and they were cannibalistic. The animal, there was very low milk production, etc. And he had given a long list of things for the South African farmer to do. And the farmer got frustrated and said, just say one thing I can do. And he said, okay, don't feed another GMO to your animals. So he planted non-GMO corn, and when it was harvested, he started feeding it to the pigs and to the cows, and they got better. He ran out, so he had to buy corn from the environment, from the field, from the market, and they got sick again. And then when he had year-round non-GMO corn growing, they got better and they were fine. But the workers on the farm were eating the corn grown on the farm. And when he was growing GMO corn, they were eating 100% GMO corn all day. And he needed 50 workers, but he had to keep 60 because 10 of them, or 20%, were always down with sickness. He had medicine cabinets full of medicines, severe headaches, flu-like symptoms. And he told the veterinarian that once or twice a month, he would be speaking to one of his workers, and he would notice that their eyes stopped tracking together but started to move independently, and within 1 or 2 days, they would be dead. He had no idea why. But when he grew the non-GMO corn and fed it to the animals, the workers got better because they were eating the non-GMO corn. And their health picked up, and it was fine until he ran out, and then it dove again with the animals. So I appreciated more what the former Monsanto scientist told me about his concerns about genetically engineering a staple food. And it's a tragedy what happened in that farm and what's probably happening in many South African farms. And unfortunately, they are probably eating more GMOs in their diet than anyone on the planet, any human. So in one sense, they're canaries telling us what's really going on. So that was one of the most shocking moments for me.